when we talk about personalization, this need, this yearn for personalized experiences, and that's what we crave as humans, right? We're tribal beings, of course, so we crave some kind of intimacy. We need that within our lives. That a website, an online experience, feels the antithesis of that feeling. And one could dare say that websites and digital experiences are anti-human. Oh God, should we go down that? I mean, humans obviously code websites. We're going down a very deep, dark path here, aren't we? Welcome to Statements of Intent. In this 20-minute episode, we're addressing how e-commerce has lost sight of the people at its very heart. You, the customer. It's a chat that's optimistic, it's casual, it's probably slightly ranty in places, but that's okay. But it's a place where I talk to senior e-commerce marketers and share their statement of how they're looking to change the status quo of e-commerce, adding more care, being more considerate to those very people that they're selling to, the customer. I'm your host, David Mannheim, the founder of Made with Intent, and we're going to jump right into it. Have fun. Hello. Welcome to Statements of Intent. Look, this is the retro. This is the reflection. This is the end of season 1, whatever that means. I don't know. I've just been told to record this, but I did put on a shirt, although I didn't comb and definitely didn't cut my hair. So I think this is some kind of special event. I think I've learned an inordinate amount. I think the important thing that I've learned is that we've kind of validated this belief that people have some kind of problem with e-commerce. Those working in it have a problem with e-commerce. They want to challenge the status quo that exists in e-commerce. And look, that's what we're all about. So Statements of Intent, the reason why we created this podcast is that we had this belief. We had a belief that people working with or in e-commerce had some kind of guiding principle or value or promise that works against what e-commerce does today within society, what feels very short-termist, short-sighted, lacks care, is very homogenized. And I found it absolutely incredible how so many other people also feel this way. There's a real community out there. My hope, just for reference for this podcast, is to give those people a home of sorts, right? So it's basically, they're designed to be 20-minute chats, just kind of short, snappy statements of intent, this guiding principle, this personal promise about how that individual feels that we should measure, we should optimize, we should personalize, or even treat customers online. And I felt very validated. And I want to talk to you now for 20 minutes also to talk about what it is that I've learned. And there are 4 things, and they all relate in some way to the fact that there's a person behind the other end of the screen. And we sometimes forget that that's the case. And we forget that's the case because of things like short-termist pressure, because of the need for efficiency and productivity. And AI certainly has not helped that. For the need that we are constantly chasing revenue, and or that we are optimizing for what is essentially the wrong metrics. You know, those are the reasons why we've created this aggregated, homogeneic, is that a word? I've made it up. I'm going to go for it. Homogeneic series of experiences that all look and feel the same. And okay, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But when we talk about personalization, this need, this yearn for personalized experiences, and that's what we crave as humans, right? We're tribal beings, of course. So we crave some kind of intimacy. We need that within our lives. That a website, an online experience feels the antithesis of that feeling. And one could dare say that websites and digital experiences are anti-human. Oh God, should we go down that? I mean, humans obviously code websites. We're going down a very deep, dark path here, aren't we? Humans obviously code websites, but there are people on the other end of the screen, both as the recipient and the giver of that information. Anyway, let's talk about that, right? Because it's incredibly deep. And Thibaut, who I think is the product director at Gusto, Thibaut Gusto, started asking that very question. When I spoke to him, he said, "What makes us human, David?" And he spoke about the fact that we may soon realize that we're actually not much more than just an advanced algorithm. But the difference between us and an advanced algorithm is emotion, is empathy. And the strongest type of emotion is connection. That relates exactly back to what I'm saying, is that us as humans, we're tribal beings, and that's what we need. We need connection. So how do you as a brand see the experience of being human through the amass of data? And there was a particular theme that data could indeed cloud the judgment of what is the right thing to do, doing the right thing, putting yourself in the customer's shoes, as Cameron Goldie, head of e-commerce at Grenade, said, is what you're trying to do. And we spoke about customer centricity for what feels like the buzzword of the 21st century. But ultimately, it's about bringing it back to connection. Chris, the e-commerce director at Castor, lovely human, big runner, big triathlon. He's got a book coming out, actually. I recommend you read it. He's a big Newcastle fan as well, who he spoke about, there's going to be a lot of football references throughout this because it's me. He spoke about what the best thing to do isn't necessarily what the easiest thing to do is. And those two things can get conflated. The ease of something to do and the best thing to do, time versus doing the right thing, are often at odds or conflict against one another. And it's almost like as you scale and as you grow as a brand, you lose sight of that. The drive for productivity. So Ed Deason over at Wiggle spoke about this. He spoke about focusing on process and efficiency, or the need to focus on process and efficiency, and that being a counter or conflict to customer obsession. Okay, yeah, customer obsession takes time. It's about relationship building. Okay, it's about people over process. That was his statement of intent. If you're on the phone to somebody like, "Oh, Sandra, how's the dog? Yeah, are they still in hospital?" That kind of conversation takes time, and it's not a directly attributable question to ask. Sandra isn't going to turn around and say, thank you for telling me that, asking me my question about Mr. Biggles, my dog, take all my money. You don't need to attribute absolutely everything. And I don't know whether TiVo was trying to get at that point where how you see and relate with customers through the awash of data isn't necessarily something that's terribly attributable. And it was a theme between Ed, between TiVo, between Chris, and Martin Newman as well, the founder of what used to be Practicology. He's a big Celtic fan, actually. Scottish man, lovely human being, likes to talk. He doubled down on that concept of trying to move away from this idea of customer service towards customer care. Customer service feels like a very one-way piece of communication, doesn't it? I'm serving you. Whereas care feels more like a two-way interaction. I found that interesting. He also started to move away from customer centricity, that 21st century buzzword, towards human centricity. And it's, having a more emotive experience with customers, turning customers into what he called fans. Maybe that's the Celtic fan coming. He's a brand ambassador for Celtic as well. Maybe it's the brand, the Celtic fan coming out of it. Can you see people as fans instead of customers? Because this is about how you talk, how you engage, how you personalize with them, how you build some kind of relevancy. I think what Martin was talking about there in my conversation with him was personalization. So I have this acronym that I use in some of my talks, which is what I call the personalization facial. Easy. And when people talk about personalization, they often speak about right timing, right message, right person. And that's all well and fine. They also often speak about recommendations or segmentation, how they talk about personalization. But for me, the definition of personalization is all about relationship. Okay. And a personalization facial is a stupid acronym for familiarity, acknowledgement, care, intimacy, authenticity, and listening. Okay, listen to those words again. Facial, familiarity. Okay, you want to be familiar with your customers. You want to understand them. Acknowledgement, you want to identify that they are indeed a human being, not by asking them, are you a robot? Care, which is basically another word for intimacy, for emotion, but it didn't work within the facial acronym. Intimacy, which is acting on that care, authenticity, having a level of purpose, and listening. Listening is probably something I wish my kids would do more often, but is one of the most important things that as brands we just sometimes fail to do. Matt Lawson, the CDO of Ribble Cycles, his statement of intent was, it's all about context. And that's a hat tip towards listening. If you listen, you get context. Look, that's what Made with Intent is designed to do. It's designed to get context. It's designed to infer signals and give meaning to those signals so you can act on them. Right? So I think what we're all talking about here is the need, the yearn for personalization, and how process can stagnate that need or acting upon that need. One of the things within what Martin was talking about was this idea of purpose, like purpose being this nebulous idea, the creation of a thing, a company, a value system that's lost over a period of time. Chris at Castor spoke about it. Paul Pryor, the head of digital at 3, big United fan, he spoke about no purpose left behind. That was his statement of intent. But he spoke about it less so from a brand perspective, but more customer perspective. So the idea that at 3, they're not just selling phones, it's a much deeper connection than that, or it could be a deeper connection than that. Customers might be buying a phone from Ukraine or from Russia, and it might be their only chance to stay in touch with a loved one, for example. It doesn't matter whether you're selling a washing machine or a kite or a Manchester United top. That's a bad example. What matters is that there are people behind the screen, behind the data. One of the interesting, how do you test that kind of mentalities was from Rich Chappell, the ex-CMO of Gymshark. I don't think he's a football fan, I'm not sure. But he said that when he spoke to some retailers, that only 1 in 5 could name their top 10 customers, online retailers. So only 1 in 5 could name their top 10 customers. That wouldn't happen in a physical environment. In a physical store, the store owner would know their top 5 customers, top 10 customers were. So we've all heard that phrase, how do we be more like the store, more like I remember when we worked with Boots, they said that all the time, which is obviously they've got a huge online presence and a huge offline presence as well. They have physical retail stores. And the conversation in the boardroom was, well, what is it like in a store? How can we be more like one of our stores? And if you really dig into why they're asking that question to basically ask, how can we be more human? How can we create the familiarity, the acknowledgement, the care, the intimacy, authenticity, listening? How do we give a facial to all of our customers, all of our prospects? I found that fascinating. So I think personal connection and doing the right thing and people over process are 2 things that I really, really learned. Not losing purpose as well. Purpose being, again, that nebulous that holds everything together. Okay, so then we move on to, well, what do you do with that information? How do you act on it? What is the measurement of that thing? And I think the appreciation that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Johnny Longdon, the group digital director at Boohoo, said what starts off as a short-termism or a measure of short-termism, reacting to some kind of pressure, usually then becomes ingrained behavior. And, we've all seen this with mattress companies or furniture companies where there's a discount every single weekend. I think that's very true. And I think that's a reflection of trade over customer, of revenue being the primary driver for something. And yes, revenue is important, but it's a balance. And it's really interesting speaking to Sean Ellis, the author of Hack and Growth. When I spoke to him, I was like, oh, so Sean, how many books have you sold? He's like, close to 1 million books. I'm on the 1 million book tour. And here I am, a wannabe author, having sold, I think we sold like 4,200 copies or something of The Person in Personalisation. I felt very, very small speaking to Sean, but what a lovely human being. So if you haven't read Hack and Growth, he's credited with coining that term. The idea, or at least the perceived idea, that growth hacking are these short-termist, like tactics, like unsustainable things. And you know what was really interesting about Sean is that when he talked about hacking growth, he couldn't have been more the opposite. It was he said that anything that leads to customers being unhappy and not coming back is probably not worth doing, which is crazy, right? So we measure things on revenue, and you could have hacks towards getting revenue. They feel quite manipulative as opposed to persuasive. And it reminds me very much of just how Sean was credited with calling the term growth hacking. Brian Eisenberg and Jeffrey Eisenberg are quoted or credited with coining the term conversion rate optimization. In all the people that I spoke with, I'd say about 11 somehow dissed conversion rate as a metric. It's who said leading versus lagging metrics? I think it was Martin Shearer, the digital director at Embra. I could be wrong with that. There's a lot of conversations. Someone mentioned the difference between leading and lagging metrics, and the fact that conversion rate is a lagging metric. Sian Veit, the ex-digital director at John Lewis, ex-chief product officer at Kingfisher, not a football fan, did actually, and maybe it was her who spoke about lagging metrics. She said that conversion rate is a lagging metric. And actually, she mentioned how it's the worst kind of metric, because customers could, in theory, fight tooth and nail for where they want to get to and still convert if they are, what Martin Newman would say, are a fan. She spoke about reinventing customer metrics as her statement of intent. Janice Thomas, MD of Look Fabulous Forever, she agreed. She said that if you only focus on conversion rate, you focus on the 2% and ignore the other 98%. Johnny Longdon also agreed, basically said that you can do something to increase conversion rate, but it might have a detrimental impact on the business. You can encourage people to buy, but they might spend less, So we're talking about customer lifetime value, Johnny. Is that right? You're talking about longer term metrics as opposed to conversion rate, which is usually session based, isn't it? That's where it came from. It was created from the Google Analytics of this world. And you're talking about expanding that. It's just funny how so many leaders thought that conversion rate was such a poor metric. It leads me to thinking, why? Why do they feel like it's such a poor metric? And I feel like there's a couple of answers to this. Number one is that it's retrospective. Okay, it's already happened. You can't influence it. Number two, it's what Tom Bailey called one of our VPs, Made with Intent. He basically called it aggregated. So conversion rate is the definition of what the average thing works for each part of a website. It's an aggregated view of something. It's an average of averages. And that leads to average of averages experiences, right? That's why we look at things in template orientations. An e-commerce website has a homepage and a PLP and a PDP and a basket and a checkout. So by optimizing towards an aggregated metric, you aggregate everything before that metric. I found that fascinating. So why the obsession with conversion rate? I didn't really speak to anybody about this thinking about it, but I think because it's easy, it's accessible, it's easy to understand. It's now entrenched in a way of thinking how e-commerce retailers all think. It says the person that founded a conversion rate optimization consultancy. This idea that you optimize a doing word for a conversion rate, a thing, and that's all you do, is wholly incorrect. I can tell you from my experience of knowing other conversion rate optimization agencies, that is not what they do. It just so happens to be an outcome of what they do. But all the insights that go into that, all the analytics work, the experience creation, the research, the validation through A/B testing and experimentation, that's all ignored in favor of what is essentially this idea of optimizing a single metric. Do you know where the term conversion optimization comes from? Do you know? So it was created in 1998 by Brian and Jeffrey Eisenberg, two chaps. I think they went on to create Conversion Sciences. And they created the term partly through serendipity. It was like pre-problem. Conversion rate optimization, the term or the category didn't exist. In fact, the only search term that remotely exists was conversion rate, because people were searching for currency conversion rate. Okay. So they knew that conversion rate from sales was an important metric. How many people enter the site, how many people end up purchasing, this funnel. So they were always doing optimization, and also search optimization by virtue was growing as well. Conversion rate was a ranking term because of currency. So they just combined the two. They optimized our conversion rate, which was a ranking term. And they were writing about it in similar terms for years and years and years before anyone was even talking about it. They were the OGs, the GOATs. So they decided to rank for the term conversion optimization. So they effectively coined it. They coined it wrongly. They spelled it with a Z, not an S, but whatever. We're not talking about the Queen's English. We are. You spelled it wrong, chaps, but it's fine. Dare I say that Brian and Jeffrey, can I say they gamed the Google algorithm to not necessarily create a business, but to have ownership in something? I think they did. And don't get me wrong, despite that, Brian always said, I remember speaking to him, Brian always said that conversion rate is a process. It's not an event. It's just that the term is stuck and it's become very popular because it's simple and it's accessible. It's too simple. It's too accessible. Anyway, so that is the term, the metric of measurement now for personalization, for experiences, for how we treat customers online. And for me, it's just very one way. I don't think it's a success metric at all. I think it's what someone called a lagging metric. So I feel like that was very, very evident throughout all the conversations that I had. And look, it just so happens that is exactly what we're trying to do at Made with Intent. We're moving away this metric of success away from retrospective towards predictive, away from something that you can't do anything with to something that you can intervene in real time. We call it expected conversion, XC, which, yes, sounds familiar and it is trademarked, but it's directly ripped off the ideologies of XG, expected goals, hence all the football quotes, right? This idea that quality does indeed beat quantity. This idea that less is actually more. So I feel as though there is a real community out there. I'm going to end this with a couple of the conversations that I had with Matt Gratz, who's the ex-customer director of Signet, and Tim Ryan, the ex-director of digital at Seasalt Cornwall. They both said something very similar, which is stay relevant, go back to basics, remove friction. In the way that you need to measure things, you need to measure things in more of a balanced way. CLV does come to mind, findability, buyability, engagement, whatever it is, it's balance. It's a marathon. It is not a sprint. No one metric can capture the health of consumer and customer relationships. You don't need to attribute everything, but you do need to find your North Star. You need to find your big, hairy goal, your BHAG. Big, hairy, ambitious goal is, isn't it? So anyway, that's what we're trying to do. Thank you so much for listening. Look, if you want any more information on this, come give us a shout at Made with Intent. We love talking about this kind of stuff. We love talking about challenging the status quo of e-commerce, but more importantly, what we can do to achieve that. That's fascinating for me. For me, the answer is creating a metric that's predictive, that's scaled, that you can intervene in real time. That is expected conversion. For me, it's about listening. It's about getting context, as Matt said. And that is all about intent. If you can understand customer intent, you could be more appropriate. When you're more appropriate and more focused in how you sell, you create more impact. It's a fairly simple equation. Have a good day, everyone. There we have it. Thank you so much for listening. Please do like, subscribe, and share on whatever platform it is that you're listening to on today. This show comes from the team behind Made with Intent, the customer intent platform for retailers. If you are, of course, interested in being more profitable whilst being more personal, then please feel free to check us out at madewithintent.ai. Thanks again for listening and joining us on our mission to change how e-commerce sees, measures, and treats their customers. I've been your host, David Mannheim. Have a great day.